All right, today what we're going to do is we're going to look at the wars of religion. So these are a series of conflicts rather that occurred between Catholics and Protestants in the 1500s and 1600s. And we're going to look at how these conflicts were simultaneously religious conflicts and political conflicts. And then we're going to look at sort of the big kahuna of these wars, which was the 30 Years' War. And we're going to look at how that ultimately resolved these conflicts between Catholics and Protestants. All right, so first we're going to look at the French Wars of Religion. And for all of these conflicts, we're going to look at the religious causes and the political causes, as well as the religious and political consequences. So we'll start with the religious causes. So France during the mid-1500s is majority Catholic. However, there's this small minority of Calvinists. And these Calvinists, remember, are spin-offs of Lutheranism. And in France, the Calvinists are called the Huguenots. And a lot of them were nobles, and we'll find out why that's important in just a second. Now, the Catholics wildly persecuted the Huguenots, as religious majorities are sometimes wont to do to religious minorities. So the Catholic King of France, King Henri II, who reigned from in the mid-1500s, tortures the Huguenots, imprisons them, etc., and really sort of the culminating event of Catholic persecution of Protestants is this massacre called the St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre. And this is actually not carried out by Henri II. It's carried out by his wife, Catherine de' Medici. So what happened was, after Henri II died, power passed to his three sons, one by one, but they were all kind of young and sickly and didn't really reign that long, except for the last one. And so what happened was, Henri II's wife and these boys' mother, Catherine de' Medici, ruled as regent. So she wasn't the queen, but she was kind of the power behind the throne. And Catherine de' Medici is convinced by this radical faction of Catholics called the Guise family in America to murder thousands of Huguenots in 1572. Now, those are the religious causes. But like we'll find out, as for all of these wars, there was also a really significant political dimension. So a lot of those Huguenots were actually nobles. And this goes back to the idea of the new monarchs that we talked about last unit. So we mentioned that in France and that in England, what happened was the power of the monarchy grew. And one of the ways in which they did that is they actually clamped down on the power of the nobles. So the nobles were not at all happy about this, right? So what they did is they embraced Calvinism as a way to maintain their own power and a way to push back against the monarchy. And what this leads to, or after the St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre, what this sort of political dimension of the conflict leads to is this power struggle between three kings, or three potential kings, called the War of the Three Henrys, which is just way too many Henrys, I agree. There's too many Henrys in this unit. And what this was a war of political control for France, but it had sort of a religious dimension. So who are these three Henrys? So the first of all is Henri III, and he's the son of Henri II, that Catholic king who was persecuting all those Protestants, and Catherine de' Medici, who was sort of blamed for the St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre that she carried out with the Guise faction. Now, Henri III, he's actually a moderate Catholic. So his goal here is, unlike mom and dad, he doesn't really want to persecute the Protestants so much. He just kind of wants to maintain order. He doesn't really want there to be a big fight. So that's why we'll say he's a moderate Catholic. Now, what he is, though, is he's challenged by the second Henry, the Duke of Guise. So he's a radical Catholic. He's the head of the Guise family. He's from that radical Catholic faction who convinced Catherine de' Medici to carry out the St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre. And what he does, he thinks Henri III is just too soft. He's too soft on those darn Protestants. So what he does is he tries to stage a coup against Henri III. And by the way, one of my favorite fun facts about Henri, Duke of Guise, is that his nickname was Scarface. So you can kind of tell how people perceived him and what kind of a person he was. Now, the third Henri in all of this conflict, is actually a Protestant. So his name is Henri of Navarre. And what he does is he approaches Henri III, so our moderate Catholic, and they get together and they defeat the Duke of Guise. Because again, their priority as rulers is just to kind of settle this conflict down. So what's really interesting about this conflict, right, is we've got this Catholic allying with this Protestant to defeat a radical Catholic in order to sort of maintain stability, right? And there's Henri of Navarre over there in a great outfit. All right, so what happens during the French Wars of Religion? So Henri III is actually ultimately assassinated by a Catholic. So he's, again, Henri III, our moderate Catholic. He's assassinated by a radical Catholic for the grave crime of cooperating with a Protestant. So Henri of Navarre, our Protestant, he wins by default. Now remember, right, though his main priority, like he's a Protestant, but his main priority is to maintain stability and kind of end all the fighting. So the political consequences of this war, right, is as we mentioned, Henri of Navarre becomes king of France and he gets named Henry IV. So just again, too many Henrys here. And what he does is he actually converts to Catholicism because he has now just found himself king sort of by accident of a majority Catholic country. And he recognizes that they aren't going to accept a Protestant king. So what he does is he converts. So again, one thing that's interesting about this is the fact that he converts. It just really highlights that this whole conflict is about power, not really about sort of genuine religious conviction, right? So Henri is not interested in making everyone else Protestant. Like he doesn't care about Protestantism even all that much. He just wants stability and power. Now, in terms of religious consequences, what Henri of Navarre does is he's actually a lot like Elizabeth I, who also, as you remember, her priority was to maintain religious stability in England. So Henri of Navarre is kind of similar there, even though he's a Catholic and she was a Protestant. So what Henri of Navarre does is he passes this law called the Edict of, I say Nantes, I think it's Nantes, the Edict of Nantes, which resolves religious conflict, or resolves this religious conflict, rather. So what the Edict of Nantes does is there's two really important principles here. So first of all, it affirms Catholicism as the official religion of France. But at the same time, it guarantees Protestant equal rights and the right to practice their faith. So again, Catholicism is the main religion, but if you're Protestant, no big deal. You can still live your life and practice Protestantism, no harm done, right? So again, what this does is it maintains stability, it maintains balance, everyone is sort of happy, sort of. All right. But there are more religious conflicts than just those going on in France. So let's talk about the 30 Years' War. And the 30 Years' War, by the way, is extremely complicated. I've done my best to sort of simplify it as much as I can. But again, it's a war that went on for 3 decades. It's going to be messy. So the 30 Years' War, sort of the way to remember this is that it starts as a religious war, but then it ends as a political one. So there's a religious dimension and a political one, but it starts more religious and ends more political. So in order to understand it, we have to kind of go back a little bit. So Charles V, again, he was that Holy Roman Emperor who tried to kick out Luther, right? So the mortal enemy of Martin Luther, aside from the Pope. What he did as Lutheranism began to spread is he actually realized that he couldn't really fight it. So what he did is he kind of gave in, and he passed something called the Peace of Augsburg in 1555. And what this law did is it allowed local leaders, so it allowed those individual German princes to either pick Catholicism or Lutheranism as the official religion of their land. So again, he's trying to sort of maintain balance and the conflict, and he's like, you know what, okay, I give up, I lose, I can't make the Holy Roman Empire 100% Catholic. So princes, if you want to be Lutheranism, fine, go ahead, pick Lutheranism, whatever, I don't care, right? I just want to maintain the stability. I have too much crap to deal with right now. But importantly, he says they can pick between Calvinism or Catholicism or Lutheranism, but he says no Calvinism. So Calvinism is not part of the Peace of Augsburg. So if you're a German prince and you want to be Calvinist, tough luck for you. Now, fast forward to 1618, where they mainly Calvinist again, so they are not allowed to pick Calvinism as an option, Bohemia, which is sort of modern day Czech Republic, so you can see on the map there. They are ruled directly by the Catholic Habsburg emperors. So what that means is the Habsburgs, who again are the rulers of the Holy Roman Empire, they get to pick what religion the Bohemians believe, right? So they pick Catholicism, but they're like, okay, kind of for a while, sort of before 1618, again, it's kind of, if you want to be a Calvinist, as long as you keep it on the down low, that's fine. But in 1618, Emperor Ferdinand II takes power, and he is absolutely not happy with this system, right? He's like, you know what? I'm a Catholic. I rule these people, and if I want to make them Catholic, I'm going to say that they're Catholic. And so he tries to reestablish Catholicism, and then he tries to suppress the Calvinist minority. Oops, it says Catholic there, that is Calvinist. And of course, as you can imagine, the Bohemians are not happy about this. They've been enjoying their freedom up until now. So what they decide to do is when Ferdinand II sends some emissaries, so some messengers, over to the Bohemians pick them up and they throw them out the window. And this is called the Defenestration of Prague. So Prague is a city in Bohemia. Defenestration is a fancy word for throwing people out a window. So the messengers are actually fine. They land in a pile of poop, so that saves their lives, which is great. But it starts this enormous war. All right. So what happens next is that other Protestant countries, first Denmark, then Sweden, see their Protestant buddies over in Bohemia being persecuted. So what they do is they get together and like, what? We're going to go defend our friends. So they pick up their armies and they go invade the Holy Roman Empire. But again, tiny, tiny, tiny countries going up against the Holy Roman Empire. And even though the Holy Roman Empire is not like at the peak of its strength, still they're big. Denmark and Sweden are small. The Holy Roman Empire totally kicks their butts, right? But then, Catholic France enters the war. Now you would think France is Catholic, Holy Roman Empire is Catholic, the French must be allying with the Holy Roman Empire. But instead, twist, France allies with the Protestants. Why? What's going on here? Why are Catholics fighting Catholics? But again, sort of remember France's priorities during this time period. This is after the Edict of Nantes, right? So they're all about religious toleration, sort of, kind of, a little bit. And look at the map here. So here's France. Here's the Holy Roman Empire. We got them over in Central Europe. We got them in Italy. We got them in the Netherlands. We got them in Spain. So France is surrounded. So what's going on here is that France's motivation for getting in this war and allying with the Protestants is totally 100% political. They don't care about religion. They just care about the fact that this huge, powerful empire has them surrounded, right? So they're like, well, the Protestants are kind of the lesser enemy here. So let's ally with them so that we can protect ourselves against the Holy Roman Empire, right? So it's kind of like how during World War II, the British and the Americans didn't like the Soviet Union because they were communists, but they're like, hey, you know what? They're better than the Nazis. So let's ally with them and go to war against the Nazis, right? So that's kind of what France is doing here. They're picking the lesser of two evils, which they see as the Protestants. All right. So the French actually turned the tide of the war. So with their help, the Protestants gain the upper hand, and the war ends with what's called the Treaty of Westphalia. And this was in 1648. So that's really important that you know the name of this treaty. Just write it anywhere next to the consequences section. Just say war ends, Treaty Westphalia. That's going to come up a lot. I will say that. It's super important. Well, let's talk about what this treaty actually did. So in terms of political consequences, this war was really the end of the Holy Roman Empire as a major power. They were on the decline already. This really kind of was the final nail in the coffin. But it's actually really good for France. As we know, they were on the winning side, right? So France is going to emerge from this from really the dominant power on the continent. The English are coming up strong, but they're an island. We're not going to deal with them right now. France is the power on the continent. This war also marks the decline of the Pope and the Church as a political power in Europe, right? So we know that the Pope was really closely aligned with the Holy Roman Empire. Holy Roman Empire gets a big kick to the butt, so does the Pope. So they really decline. And they aren't even allowed to come to the negotiations for the Treaty of Westphalia, so they are completely out of the game. This is also really great for the German states. So they, as a result of this treaty, as a result of the end of this war, they become mostly politically free from the Holy Roman Empire. They're not a unified state yet. That's going to take a really long time, but they're kind of just chilling there in Central Europe, and they're no longer completely under the control of the Holy Roman Empire. The Dutch Netherlands, which, as we remember, are under the control of Spain, they also become mostly free. And again, really the key consequence of the 30 Years' War, this completely ends the religious wars, right? So no more explicit conflicts between Catholics and Protestants. That's over, that's done. Religion and politics are now separate, nothing to do with each other. War is now about power, it's about economics. It was always about that, but now it's extra about that. Religion is not even a veneer anymore. All right, let's talk about the religious consequences, because there are some too. So first of all, we mentioned, right, that there was this Peace of Augsburg that allowed the various parts of the Holy Roman Empire to pick what their religion was. And this war actually kind of extends that peace. It makes it even broader. So what this does, right, we remember that rulers could pick between Catholicism, Catholicism and Lutheranism. It says they can still pick between those options, but now Calvinism represents a third option. So if you're a German prince and you want to pick Calvinism, if you're one of the various states in the Holy Roman Empire, you want to pick Calvinism, totally cool, you can do that. And what it means is that all local leaders get to determine their official religion. And that was already part of the Peace of Augsburg, remember, right? Not only that, but they also must allow minority religions to practice freely. Because again, sort of one of the points of this war was to put an end to all those religious conflicts, right? Or one of the points of the treaty, rather, was to put an end to all those religious conflicts. So just like in France, they passed the Edict of Nantes guaranteeing religious toleration. So too, in the Treaty of Westphalia, do they guarantee sort of some limited religious toleration in an effort to maintain the peace.